Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. Let's do it. Who is undoubtedly the scariest person you've ever met? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. My dad eats mushrooms from his backyard and hoses out his toaster and hangs it by the cord on the washing line to dry. A nurse I've worked with once. She completely stepped over boundaries, disconnected a PIC line without informing me. The PIC-trained nurse didn't wear gloves or wash her hands, couldn't take criticism, or couldn't be taught about the error of her clinical judgment. Instead, shouted at myself, the patient, and other staff. Didn't come back, so she's probably moved on to another area. The patient? That was her last go at a palliative chemo, to give her some more months of quality time with her children. The PIC blocked. They didn't give her another one. The nurse contributed to that woman having less time with her family. I will never forgive her. My brother-in-law. He's a chronic alcoholic with a narcissistic personality and violent tendencies. He has assaulted each of his siblings and SA'd his ex-wife and little sister. He's been enabled and taught to be a victim his whole life. I'm terrified of him. But he's someone you never want to show fear or weakness. My granddad, when he was alive, he was a sweet, humble old man who loved gardening, but oh my God, I do not know who allowed him to keep driving. He was 84 with arthritis, plus he was deaf and almost blind, but he insisted on still driving. One time he parked his car on a tram track with my sister inside it. He is the sole reason I think there should be an age limit on driving licenses. My parents moved into a neighborhood with a truck driver as a neighbor. When they finally met him, he drove all the time. They found out his wife had killed herself and his son had been in jail or prison, and on and off since he was a minor. Trucker dude was super rough around the edges, but had acquired quite a bit of wealth over his career of hard work. My parents started having him over for dinners and became pretty good friends. He didn't like to talk about his son and got real grumpy when his name came up. Dad wasn't the direct problem. His son got released from prison and came back home on a last chance deal with Dad. He was in rehab. He was helpful and helping my parents with projects and chores. They started trusting the guy. He seemed like things were going well in his life for once. I even met the F-up and agreed he was a nice kid with a bad life. He was older than me, and I still say kid, lol. Well, Dad called my parents and told them he had been missing for 2 nights, and that's not a good sign. Turns out, he went on a bender, beat the living shit out of his girlfriend in a Home Depot parking lot, and evaded a cop on his way out. He started calling my parents with burner phones, asking if he could come over. The answer was a hard no. He then escalated to he was gonna roll up with his crew and take their shit while they slept. That escalated things even more. He got caught the next day as a trap house and arrested with an illegal handgun. Effer was locked in for 7 years and released on good behavior. Nobody knows where he's at. And his dad died a few years back. They think they saw him multiple times, sitting outside of his old house, late at night. That's the scariest person I know. My brother-in-law's best friend, who works for the government, he's not allowed to tell us what he does, and all we know, he leaves for a couple of weeks at a time every few months, speaks several languages, and looks like he's cut out of wood. There was one time where he came over to a party I was having, and I'd set up some VR games for people to try. There was a game where zombies attack you from all sides, and it's about keeping your head on a swivel and headshots. I don't remember the specifics, but none of us had gotten past level 2 or 3. He made it to something like 30 without breaking a sweat. It was his first time playing the game, and he hasn't gamed since SNES days. Everyone that saw him play or move that day agrees he's probably not working in IT. My father, a wife-beating criminal cocaine addict full of steroids and anger issues. He showed up at my little sister's house last January and threatened her for money. But the dangerous part is that he's scary smart. Gotta give credit where credit is due. That guy is not stupid, and that's what makes him all the more dangerous. There's very few people I'm genuinely afraid of, but he's one of them. What some men and some women did in World War II are things that most of us will never understand or comprehend, and that should be a good thing. Former high school classmate who became a cop and started a pedophilia ring, eventually crossing multiple state lines and trading services for video game systems, all while abusing the neighborhood children. May he rot in the federal penitentiary that currently houses his nasty ass. My neighbor Frank is from Sicily. He smokes in the supermarket, drives like a nutcase, can swear in 3 languages. He's 80 years old, and he was drinking limoncello on his roof this morning. One of my favorite people. I used to work for different pot farms out in Northern California. I got a job working for some guys another friend was working for. They were brothers. I worked for the one brother, mostly on his farm. He pretended to be a peace and love hippie guy who went to music festivals and stuff. The other brother, it turns out, was kind of a mob boss for the Bulgarian mob. I thought they were just pot growers, which was semi-legal at the time. It turns out they had their hands in all sorts of things, including sex trafficking. I had to nope the F out of that situation when I found out what was really going on. It was wild too, because everyone I met came off as pretty nice. I never suspected them of being full-on gangsters. They didn't want to pay me when I quit, and I almost got mauled by their massive pit mastiff dog. I was pretty naive and highly stoned back then. My grandfather, wonderful, kind, and caring man, won a military cross for exceptional bravery for taking out 2 machine gun nests in World War II. He ran out of ammo and killed multiple enemies with a shovel by hand. Was quiet, not boastful, but towards the end of his life talked about how easy it became to kill in the war, and he remembered the sound of an enemy's head coming off when he hit him with a shovel. Made me think how quiet and unassuming he was, but when necessary, he was able to do that. I worked at Bullfrog Spas, a hot tub manufacturer, for a short period some years ago, and they employed good behavior prisoners because the prison was next door to the factory. There were a few guards around at all times, but we worked closely together and always got to know the inmates in our areas. Of course, people would ask them what they were in for. Variety of stuff, such as failed hired hitmen, robbery, etc. So probably them or my mother. To be honest, though, they were super fun or cool to work with, highly recommended. They weren't allowed certain luxuries, but had water flasks, so sometimes on factory breaks I'd ask them if they wanted anything, candy, snacks, or soda, and put it in the flask for them to enjoy. When out of sight of the guards walking around, they appreciated it quite a lot. Haha. What some men and some women did in World War II are things that most of us will never understand or comprehend, and that should be a good thing. My grandma, she got me drunk at 2, tried to groom me, tried to sell my mom for money, is a raging alcoholic. Last year she was taking meds for her liver. You weren't allowed to drink alcohol on the meds. She did anyway. And her tongue would swell so she couldn't breathe. No worries. She would just use an EpiPen. Not as direct as many comments here, but I was briefly in business with a former high-ranking politician in my country. They weren't particularly malicious, but their arrogance and narcissism was matched only by their incompetence. It was terrifying that someone who I wouldn't trust to wipe their own ass used to play a significant role in running a G20 country. I know everyone thinks politicians are morons, but that was the first-hand evidence of how effed we all must be. In the 80s, my father knew a family of brothers. They were all connected people. The oldest didn't trust banks and only used cash. rolls of notes as thick as your wrist. As a kid, I got stuff for Christmas that fell off the back of a truck, new bikes, etc. If a car was stolen, it could be easily stripped for parts in hours, as one brother owned a scrapyard. My dad worked with them regularly and always got paid well, but never said too much about the work. Me. I single-handedly have the power to completely upend my life at a moment's notice and run it into the ground. There isn't a single other person in the world that can do that. I got close with a person I met for an online hookup. After 6 months, he opens up to me about how he has multiple murderous thoughts and he's in therapy for it. Told me how he used poisons in very creative ways on his bullets and got them extremely sick. I thanked him for the opening up to me, then slowly got too busy to hang out anymore. The list goes on and on. I was in a mental health psychiatrist state hospital, and the unit I was on was an admissions unit, and maybe 4 or 5 out of 22 had no criminal record. I wasn't one with a record. A murderer, arsonist, abuser, it goes on. But the most dangerous? The nicest woman, very religious, kind, and sweet. She killed her mom. To her words, she blacked out. She explained that every few years, she just had a snap. She gets hospitalized. I talked to her a lot. She genuinely was a good person, at heart, with a terrible past. There's also this guy, only a few years older than me, with very violent tendencies. You never push someone to why they are in any setting, and I know that from prior hospitalization. Most everyone will say why they were there, but him? No. He was violent with a cop, with a weapon. He had mental health issues, no doubt about it, but he had no remorse for any of it. But to be honest, he never seemed to think any of what he did was wrong. With an outwardly violent person, you can expect an outburst, but with someone who isn't yet has had such a past episode, absolutely. That scares me. Yes, I mean, it's always good to open up, but in that situation, you were right to get too busy really quick. My uncle, he's a paranoid schizophrenic, but also very aggressive, and he would often instigate fights. Sometimes these fights would be against multiple people, and there were a few times I watched him beat up 3 and 4 people at once, including one time when someone was hitting him with a bat. He always thought he was being threatened, and his fight or flight response was always chose fight. So his alternate, or adrenaline, could turn on at the drop of a hat. He isn't a huge man, but I've seen him do some insane physical things. The one instance that really stands out was when the cops were called on our house due to him causing a domestic disturbance. This was when he was only starting to succumb to his illness, so he still had his wits about him, much of the time. So, when he opened the door and the cops asked to come inside, he said no, they didn't have any warrant, and from what I remember, and from what I now know about the law, there wasn't visible evidence of property cause. But the cops tried to push their way past him into the house anyway. He didn't resist, but they couldn't move him back, so they decided they were just going to arrest him. The cop at the top of the stairs tried to cuff him, and they tumbled down the steps. When they got up, my uncle attacked, and I watched as he beat the shit out of 4 cops for about 10 minutes until they finally subdued him. And by subdued, I mean they pepper sprayed him right away, was beating on him with nightsticks the whole time, and they had to tase him at least twice. The cops were effed up of it by the end. He basically threw the smaller female cop across the street at one point. He spent a few nights in jail and eventually got probation. I don't know all the specifics of how he avoided real jail time. I was only like 9 years old when this all happened. And this him about anything for self-preservation reasons. I assume it's because they tried to enter the home and arrest him without a warrant or probable cause, or potentially because the one cop put their hands on him first, causing them to fall down the steps. But I don't really know. I also don't know why they don't shoot him in the moment. I assume it's because there was a little kid watching in the doorway. For other reasons I won't go into, he eventually became my primary caregiver until I turned 18, and his adoption and schizophrenia only got worse. Childhood was fun.